Anyone who's been paying attention to the business of biotech knows that we don't often host venture capital leaders on this show. My guest chair is typically reserved for people in the throes of building biopharmaceutical companies. But when you have the opportunity to interview a guy with a Johns Hopkins BA, a Penn MD, and a Wharton MBA, the same guy who co-founded successful biotechs like Arcellx and Nkarta prior to launching his capital management practice, and whose capital management practice played the lead role in the launch of CRISPR Therapeutics, and a guy who's simply a fantastic human being and a joy to talk with, you make an exception. I'm Matt Pillar. This is the Business of Biotech. And if you haven't placed him already, my guest on today's show is SR1 Capital Management CEO and Managing Partner, Dr. Simeon George. Simeon, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's great to be on this platform with you, podcast with you, and look forward to today's conversation.
As do I. Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on. And as I mentioned from the outset of the conversation here in my opening sort of prologue, you're an MD, and typically the MDs that I have on this program, I'm going to say almost all of them, if not all of them, have spent a considerable amount of time early in their career either practicing or working in academia, or perhaps working in research at a large hospital or research university, prior to even thinking about or entertaining the idea of jumping into the business side of biotech, becoming a member of industry, working for a biopharmaceutical company, or, God forbid, jumping right in and launching new biotech companies. You look to be, at least on paper, quite different. It looks like you kind of made that decision very early on in your career. So I want to start there. I'm just curious around sort of what your intentions were at the time and what your frame of mind was when you came out of you came out of your MD studies and said, all right, what do I do next?
Yeah, no, thank you. It's a great question. And I would say for me, the majority of the most important decisions that I've made in my life have been driven more by heart and intuition and gut, if you will, rather than analyzing and sort of taking a more calculated way to decide what to do. And so, from my earliest memories through to today, what I've been drawn to and most passionate about is sort of being at an intersection between life sciences and problem solving and doing things that seem impossible, whether it's in the case of taking care of patients and trying to get them through some of the most challenging moments in their lives, or doing it, frankly, at scale, which I think the work that I do now in the industry that we're so grateful to be able to work in allows us to have access to, is the ability to have an impact across hundreds, thousands of patients, their loved ones, the ecosystem, and society beyond that. And so when I was making the initial decision, that was sort of the true north that I was gravitating towards. And I would also say, having benefited from the dual degree at Penn and having spent time between my clinical rotations and the business world, where I spent time in investment banking at Goldman, consulting at Bain, as well as SR1, where I actually did an internship, I at least have some level of informed sense of which direction, really resonated with my heart and with my intuition and gut. And so those were the two principal drivers behind which I took the leap, not knowing, frankly, how things might play out over the medium to long term, but just believing in the short term, this would be a great place to continue to build a skill set, experience, network, and then continue to follow my intuition around where to go next.
It's interesting you should say that. I mean, it's curious to me, like, you're so well trained, right? And well trained on data and facts on what we know about, human biology and medicine. And yet you let your gut and intuition guide such major decisions. Where do you think that comes from? Like, where do you think, what influences Simeon George to follow his heart rather than his very well trained and talented mind?
Yeah,
I mean, not that you don't follow that as well. Right. I don't mean to discredit that, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. I mean, it's really funny. I mean, again, Matt, I'm sure we might get into this, but if I think back to my role as an investor over the last 10, 15 years, I can tell you in pretty much every instance, like, it's been within the first few minutes of meeting a founder entrepreneur, I've known that I wanted to invest in this company.
Mm.
And I've done the work, to your point. Like, it's not like I'm not rigorous on the analysis or that my team and I aren't spending time on all the details, but that initial intuition has always been, for me, just an incredible, I think, strength of mine. And, I'm not sure if it's God-given or if I've developed it over time. I do think my own sort of background, I moved around a lot as a child, different schools, different school systems between the UK, US. I've always been in uncomfortable situations, I'd say. And I've relied on an initial like self-belief, self-confidence, and an ability to make decisions in rapid fire to put me into situations that are more comfortable or that I can manage. And so that is the way I approach the work that I do. And if I'm honest, I feel more at home in those situations where it is uncertain. Like, there is no black or white decision, and you have to have a level of belief, trust, but verify. Like, you have an initial instinct or sort of direction, and you do some validating work, and then you go back to that belief and sort of decide then what to do. So that has been, I'd say, foundational to my life experience.
Yeah, that's interesting. I believe the first time we spoke, you told me that you grew up in the UK, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you came over here for college, and I think I asked you how it's possible that you don't have an accent.
I know it's still, I mean, my friends and family still don't understand how I managed to end up with this American accent. But I think there's no great answer. I wish I still had it. I think I did have it. I'm pretty confident. My parents will say I did have it. And then I actually moved into the American school system when I was in middle school. So I went to the American school, London, and so had that sort of formative period where I was transitioning into the US system. And I probably subliminally or unconsciously tried to lean into fitting in when developing an American accent. So that might be part of it. I wish I could get it back though, Matt. I will tell you, it probably would help me more with that accent now than is the case. But that's where we are.
Can't just call it up, huh?
No.
I want to hear SR1's origin story because it's unique as well. Tell us a little bit about its foundations at GSK and how it came to be a standalone entity.
Yeah, so that's right. So SR1 Capital Management, the firm that I work in now, that I lead, is less than 4 years old. It's an independent investment firm that was spun out of GSK, GlaxoSmithKline, one of the largest multinational pharmaceutical companies, in the fall of 2020. And prior to that, SR1 was the venture arm of GSK. It was a corporate entity that invested in biotech. And to give you some sense, it started investing in biotech in the mid 1980s, when the field was certainly emerging, and there was, SmithKline at the time had capital on their balance sheets, and there was this new field, and they thought, let's create a vehicle that can give us some exposure to that. And to their credit, and to the credit of the organization as it evolved with mergers and leadership changes, the mission of that fund was really to be a financial vehicle, first and foremost, investing in this new field, emerging field of biotech that everyone appreciated would have an impact on the pharma ecosystem, and to provide a strategic lift to that organization, the R&D business development organization. But it was always set up with the financial sort of mindset in terms of how we thought about investing and returning capital. And so it was really that approach when I joined, in the late 2000s through to 2020, when we spun out, that we used to build a really meaningful network, invest in some really high quality companies, develop a track record, sort of do all of the capabilities of an independent fund, but doing it with one investor, which was GSK. And then we transitioned out, created a new fund, raised fresh pools of capital, have a broad set of investors, including GSK now, but are essentially on that same mission and journey of investing in biotech, identifying and nurturing the next crop of hopefully, generational startups, like companies that have an ambition to really transform the life sciences ecosystem.
Yeah. What was your role when SR1 was still a GSK entity? What was your role? Like, I guess kind of walk me through how your role there developed to the point where when it did spin out, you were tapped on the shoulder to lead it.
Yeah. So, I
Or
mean,
was it a hostile, or was it a hostile takeover on Simeon George's part?
no, this is done in a very collaborative way. And you can hopefully ask folks on my team or outside, and they might corroborate that. So again, so I joined as an associate or entry level position into an investment firm, which was SR1. And the first phase was really learning the trade, the craft of investing in biotech. So meeting with companies, doing due diligence, supporting senior members of the team. And that period, again, for folks who are listening, was formative because it was post-global financial crisis. So it was, 08, 09, 10, where, the public markets, frankly, didn't really exist. Capital was constrained. And it was challenging for any company to really take shape and develop and do all the things that, frankly, we take for granted a little bit today, I think. So I learned those formative sort of challenges and experiences during that first phase. And then I shifted into a more senior role. I moved to the Bay Area. So I'd been in Philadelphia for the first part of my career with SR1. I moved to the Bay Area really to be the front face of SR1 in this vibrant ecosystem that is, West Coast biotech, Bay Area biotech, and really spent that period of time really trying to build a strong network of founders, entrepreneurs, investors, and managed to invest in some really high quality companies and learned from those entrepreneurs, those founders, those syndicates. Again, we're going to get into like the business of biotech, like what does it take to really create value in our ecosystem? And again, sort of coming out of that global financial crisis, there was starting to be some thawing around the ecosystem, around the capital markets. And so I got to experience that through some of those early companies that we invested in. And the third phase was really what I would describe as the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey. I had gotten the itch to get closer to actually starting companies, and that led to investments. I should say starting companies, and you mentioned in the beginning, Arcellx and Incarta were really two companies that started from a blank sheet of paper, really a labor of love for myself and my co-founder, Ali Bebahani, who's at NEA. And we pulled those together with some incredible scientific founders, Dario Campagna in the case of Incarta, and David Hilbert in the case of Arcellx, and launched those companies. But for that period, I got to live and breathe the experience of being a startup entrepreneur and, convincing first myself, then my team at SR1, then other investors and entrepreneurs and scientists to join these startups. And so, again, just an amazing experience at that point in time. And during that same period, invested in CRISPR when it was also really just a fledgling startup with, I joke, like two guys in a garage with some questionable IP. And so got to sort of ride that amazing experience and wave through to today, which has been just an enormous privilege for me. And then the last phase, I guess the phase now that I'm in, is continuing that entrepreneurial journey. But as you pointed out, working with GSK and external investors to figure out a way to create a new fund, spinning out from the large organization, setting up essentially a startup, focusing on some core principles around which I've just described, but then really thinking now with an ambition of how do we take it to the next level and how do we continue to create a firm that is truly going to be elite. And so I've been running the firm now 4 years as we've been an independent firm, but had been running SR1 during the last couple of years prior to the spin out. So I've had sort of the full transition and experience in this leadership role now.
Yeah. Your experiences in '08, like during that downtime in the economy, since then, I mean, from '08 to 24, we've seen it. I guess you describe it as a roller coaster. We've seen a lot of big ups and a lot of big downs again. How did that, I guess, that experience in '08, which was among your first experiences in the space, how did it sort of influence your style and your mindset when times are good? Like what how did it influence like how you steady the course, regardless of whether markets are going ballistic and funding everything and everyone, or being incredibly discerning and not funding much?
Yeah, I mean, I try as best I can to harken back to those experiences because they were both formative, but they're also learnings that you can apply at any point in time. And I think the more I can sort of have that mindset around lean, mean, sort of fundamental driven, the better off I will be as an investor, and hopefully our companies can benefit from that. So I'd say the first thing, and I really think about this at sort of just a startup level, like ultimately, whether it's biotech or high tech or crypto or AI, or whatever it is, like, the job of a startup is to run a business that can create value and have a clear value proposition, and as efficiently as it can validate that value proposition and create a product that fits with what the market needs are. And in our space, we're so blessed to have an ability to work in an area where ultimately it's a medicine that touches a patient, that shows that the drug is working, has a true clinical impact. And that is ultimately the only principle in our business that goes across market cycles, where inflation is, whether we're living through a global pandemic, whatever is happening in the world. If you can actually work in a manner that is focused on where is the medicine, how does this benefit patients, there is value to be created. And so I try and stay as focused on that anchoring philosophy. That's point number one. And point number two, it's really, being on an entrepreneurial or founder journey with the team there to try and help them as best we can put out every fire that's coming and being thrown their way, whether it's around capital raising, hiring, pharma partnering, again, whatever's happening on the macro that's impacting SVB blowing up, whatever it is, like being a thought partner, being someone that's there to counsel, to advise, to support, and sort of the blocking and tackling all the way through to the more strategic elements. It's really staying consistent with this mindset of we are in service of the founders and entrepreneurs and the startups that we're backing, with the assumption being that they're on this journey of science to medicine. So those are the things that I try and keep in my mind. And I find when I do that, everything else becomes noise or things that you can then calibrate how you want to deal with the particular issue.
Yeah, those external forces. All right, so I want to break down some of the ground that you just covered, and I want to start. I want to start with you mentioned where is the medicine, and what's the patient impact? Like two central tenets of the mission. So what's your opinion on that? So, I mean, where is the medicine? Since you got into this business, that question, the answer to that question has probably changed. You've seen trends, So where is it today? And if you want, maybe even share some of the trend line that you've seen since you started founding and funding biotechs.
Yeah. I mean, the truth is now I feel like we have, relative to even when I started, more tools in our armamentarium than we've ever had. And when I talk about tools, I'm talking principally about the different modalities, technologies, from small molecule through to advanced therapies, platform technologies. We talked about CRISPR, there's RNA, all the different ways you can modulate. So we have this amazing suite of capabilities, and there's still challenges there. And some of them are frankly meaningful bottlenecks. So manufacturing, sort of the cost of supplying and manufacturing at scale a product, significant bottleneck. And so we've got point solutions around off the shelf as one example of ways that people are trying to solve it. There's delivery challenges, which again can limit where a therapy can reach most effectively. And, liver is where, again, a lot of these advanced therapies end up. And so how do you get the medicine to different parts of the body? But, if you take a step back, there's more tools than we know what to do with. So it is actually in some ways a blessing and a curse, because what it means is the startups and investors such as ourselves have to be really, I'd say, vigilant and prudent to guard against falling in love with the technology, but rather focusing on, again, why is this particular, if it's a platform or, technology, why is it the right approach to go after a disease setting, whether it's the target you're talking about, the patient population, what is, again, going back to product market fit, I think that needs to be as refined as you can make it, as early in the journey as you can make it. And that is something that we have certainly been guilty of waiting too long in some instances. And as a result, you probably spend more time because you're in love with the technology and you're tinkering with it and you're optimizing in a way that practically doesn't help with that first key principle that I talked about. And so, I think where we are today, we've got an amazing suite of technologies. we still have significant unmet need, head to toe, disease area, across disease area. And we really are at the tip of the spear in terms of what we're able to see and show now. And so again, using the CRISPR example, we have one approved medicine for sickle cell and beta thalassemia, Casgevy, which again, incredibly proud of the CRISPR team and the Vertex partnership. And now hopefully we're going to treat and cure patients. But, Matt, there are hundreds, if not thousands of diseases where we hope to use gene medicines now, right, to be able to treat, correct, cure. And so the onus now is on CRISPR and all the startups that are using these techniques to go and prosecute against the biology that makes the most sense with the tools that they have.
Yeah. Looking at the portfolio and the companies we've been talking about, obviously we've been talking about cell and gene therapy companies a little bit here, just in reference to some of the companies that you've been involved with. Do you have sort of a deference towards the cell and gene space, ATMPs, or would you characterize SR1 as more agnostic in terms of the modalities it's most interested in?
I'd say it's fairly agnostic. I haven't looked at the most recent numbers. We've done, I think, about 10 deals this year between seed, startup, all the way through late stage, private and public. And just skimming through them in my mind now, it's a mix. Like we've got small molecules, we've got biologics, advanced therapy. So it's, again, there's no one size fits all. We look at it on a case by case basis. We certainly have deep expertise in these advanced areas to be able to call on and leverage as we are reviewing and underwriting a particular opportunity. But we will look at any approach that an entrepreneur or founder or startup is working on.
Yeah. What about I want to ask sort of the same question, but from an indication standpoint. It's easy for people who have mission-driven philosophies to latch onto or marry to a specific indication or sets of indications. And when your goal is to make a broad patient impact, generally, like from the physician's perspective, broaden that patient impact. There's a huge continuum there. Like you can make a giant impact on people who suffer from a terrible and debilitating and perhaps deadly rare disease, but it's a limited number of patients, huge impact, limited number. Or, you can tackle any number of indications in oncology where you can have an impact on millions of patients. Do you have any preference there in terms of your own kind of your own kind of direction?
Yeah, I mean, this goes a little bit to the inner workings of SR1, and I do think this is in my opinion, one of our differentiating features is we spend a ton of time on what we call organizational health and design and how we operate as a team. And it's a balancing act between sort of having this collaboration, teamwork orientation with an individual approach that allows folks on my team, including myself, to express ourselves and to follow the things that we're most excited about. And so the way that we square that, if you will, is we use what's called a prepared mind approach, which is each person on the team basically has the ability to focus in on certain disease areas, modalities, whether it's rare, niche indication, orphan indication, all the way through cardiovascular, metabolic. And we have almost like majors and minors. And so people, through their own choosing, lean into areas that they're most excited about. They follow the science, they build the networks, they meet with companies, founders, they have a sense of where pharma is. And so across the tapestry of SR1, you end up with, without too much over-engineering, essentially most of the key disease areas covered, modalities covered. And so we have within our own rubric a way to be able to efficiently I'd say identify, prepare, or react to what's coming at us. And I really do, lean on the team to follow what gets them excited, what gets them out of bed, rather than being prescriptive and saying we're only doing this or we're doing that. And that it's not only for disease area, but also for stage, because we are a firm that invests across multi-stages. It also is a way for us to say we are really looking for the best in class from startups all the way through late stage. And we want people on the team to be able to spend time in the various areas, share knowledge. So that is also helpful for us to be able to take what we're seeing at the late stage and apply it to early stage and see, again, differentiation, competition, things that, again, can be really helpful, how that might adopt it. So I think hopefully that answers your question. There is no one size fits all within SR1. I really want the team to feel empowered to go after the stuff, areas that they're most excited about.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely does, but it begs a question about the team. So I want to talk about people for a minute. The team at SR1, beginning with the team at SR1, like what does that team look like? Like, well, what is it comprised of in terms of expertise and what people are doing? And so it's a multi-part question. I want to get a good illustration of what the team at SR1 looks like and what they're doing, and then I want you to reflect a little bit on how the gut and intuition leadership style that you expressed earlier in our conversation applies to building that team out.
Yeah, good question. So I think about our work as being principally in three categories. There's the sourcing piece, which I think we just talked about in terms of how, between prepared mind and allowing folks to go after areas of interest, that I'd say largely covers sourcing. And there's an investment team that's comprised of an investment committee, and we'll get into the committee in a second, 4 members, including myself, a set of investment professionals. There's 5 members on the investment professional side. And these are, again, extremely talented, generally technically trained or years of experience in industry that are working closely with the investment committee. So roughly 10 of the investing team. And then we have another 5 or 6 what we call venture partners that are there across different capacities, whether it's the sourcing piece. The second category after sourcing is selecting. And so there's this piece around how do we ultimately hone in on which are the deals that we want to do. And this is where I think your question around, again, trust but verify, how do you rely on your intuition, validate it or invalidate it based on the work that you do, and then come back to your gut. That's where that selecting piece becomes critical. And so we have on a weekly basis, at least 2 meetings with the team where we are reviewing deals, getting updates from sub teams on the work that they're doing, and having, frankly, fairly open conversations, which the mindset really there is best ideas win. Like no one knows what the truth is. And so if you're you have prior knowledge, you're prepared, you've done the work on the particular deal, you have as much data, you're convinced, you come in and you have a dialogue with myself and other members of the team, and we genuinely are there to support the best ideas that might come from these sorts of interactions. So that's the selecting piece. It has a mix of art and science to it, which I think is important. And then the last piece is summiting. So there's sourcing, selecting, and summiting. And summiting is the area where all the work that goes in post-investment. So it's like you're married to the startup now. How do you make sure that that marriage is as successful as it can be and it reaches whatever the goals and aspirations are for that enterprise? And so again, between the investing team and these venture partners who are incredibly talented operators who've been in roles in startups where they've been successful at building and scaling businesses, we bring all of those capabilities to bear in a way that is hopefully, again, of service to the entrepreneur and the founder. It's not forced on them. It really is genuine interaction that is collaborative. And we have found it to a T, to a company, to be something that has been incredibly well received by the entrepreneurs and the startups. So those are the 3 areas that we focus on, and that's the way the team is organized, aligned on those principles.
Your face lit up a little bit when you got to the summiting part. Is that your favorite part?
I mean, again, going back, Matt, to the point on the problem solving, I like to work on hard things. Like I like to work on things where you don't know how you're going to do it. Like genuinely, you don't know how to do it. And so it requires you to bring everything that you have. It requires hard work. You have to get lucky. Like I think we have to acknowledge there's an incredible amount of luck involved. Certainly in my career, I've seen that and been the benefit, I've benefited from that. But it's like putting yourselves in these incredibly hard positions and then figuring out what are all the ways through blood, sweat, and tears and resilience that you can work through it. And that, for me, has been the most inspiring part of my career, whether it's with the portfolio companies or, frankly, with the journey of SR1 and where we've reached.